All right, today we're going to look at the introduction to cell notes. This is just an introduction, so this is not going to go into any great detail. That will be coming in the next couple videos. So we're going to look at just a brief overview of what cell theory kind of is all about. All right, so let me grab my pen here and get ready to go. All right, so first guy we want to talk about is Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke is the person who is responsible for the term cell. He looked at cork through a microscope. This is what he saw. He kind of, drew it, wrote it down, and the little boxes here in the cork reminded him of the little rooms where monks would go, like in a monastery, to pray, and that's called a monastic cell. So it's today. These are cells, and it's stuck. Now, Robert Hooke is maybe someone you haven't heard of before. But is actually important to a lot of different branches of science. He was a very influential guy, very intelligent guy. He was a contemporary with Isaac Newton. They weren't great friends by any stretch, but he was kind of working around the same time. So, Robert Hooke came up with the term cell. The next guy we want to talk about is named Anton von, and it's pronounced Leeuwenhoek. All right, Leeuwenhoek. He is, I believe he's from Denmark, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that. But he was the first person to see living cells underneath the microscope. He called them wee animalcules, which is just fun to say, or wee beasties. And he is, the first person to look at living cells on the microscope. So Robert Hooke. In the late 1600s, he said, like 1660s, he says, hey, there are cells. When we zoom in really close on this cork, we see these cells. Anton von Leeuwenhoek, he looked at, rainwater. He looked at diarrhea. He looked at like everything. He looked at snot. He looked at spit. He looked at the grass through his microscope, and he found living cells, okay? In 1838, so fast forwarding quite a bit, we have Matthias Schleiden. He's a botanist. He puts forth the idea that all plants are made of cells. 1839, so shortly thereafter, right, a year later, Theodor Schwann says that all animals are made of cells. So in this slide, we can see this is a plant cell. You may already know some things about plant cells, like you probably know that this rigid outside portion of a plant cell is called a cell wall. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. You might know that, hey, this is a plant cell. It's got all this, green stuff in here, right? These are chloroplasts. Need my pen to work here. All right, so things you probably already know about plants, but it was Matthias Schleiden who said, hey, these things are all made of cells. Theodor Schwann, he says all animals are made of cells. So this is a cross section of the skin of a mouse. I actually made this slide, stained it and everything. I think this is one of the ones I made. And you can see here that you've got all different kinds of cells going on. So, here is a hair follicle, right? It's growing out of the skin. I think I made this slide. I don't remember. Right, so there's our hair follicle that's been kind of cut in half. You can see all these little cells down here are what makes the hair grow. All right, we can see that there are these kind of pink here. These are all muscle cells. Here is our epidermis, right? Our skin cells right on the outside. Here are a bunch of fat cells down here. So we can see that animals are made of cells. Rudolf Virchow in 1855 tells us that all cells come from other cells. All right, and this is the microscopic view of an onion in its root system. So right here, and right here, we can see that there are some interesting things going on that don't necessarily look like this is like a normal plant cell, right? This is our normal guy. And all these guys are different. And what they're actually doing is they're dividing. They're making new cells, okay? This one looks like it's about to start division as well. This one looks like it just divided. That one has just divided, right? You can see we have two nuclei. So it's obvious that the cells are responsible for reproducing and making new cells. And when you put Schleiden, Schwann, and Virchow together, you get cell theory. And so you want to know cell theory. This is something you're going to see over and over again. So number one, cell theory says that all living things are made of cells. Number two, the cell is the unit of structure and function for all living things. You've probably noticed that in biology, we talk about structure and function a lot. The structure of the cell determines its function, determines what it can do. Right? A nerve cell would not make a very good muscle cell. Just like if we look back at this animal's cross section here, these fat cells, right? This is a fat cell. It cannot do the same job as one of these little columnar cells, right? These cells that, give us some protection between, the outside and our muscle cell, right? Here would be our muscle cells, and they're kind of long, right? They kind of look stretched out, right? So that they can contract and expand and move. So like the structure of a cell determines its function. So that's really important. And the third part of cell theory says that all cells come from other cells. Okay. So make sure you know what cell theory says. Now, the second thing with cells is we can easily divide them into two different groups. There are the prokaryotic cells and there are the eukaryotic cells. So the eukaryotic cell is here on the right. And something I want to put out, first of all, this is, we're going to say not to scale. All right, because prokaryotic cells are tiny compared to eukaryotic cells. All right, so I've zoomed in on this so we can see some prokaryotic cells here, but cells are small, prokaryotic cells are really small. And the big thing that I hope we notice is that a eukaryotic cell has a very clear nucleus. It's got a bunch of organelles, right? It's got things going on. It's got this, system of membranes here that is connected to the nucleus right there. We've got all this other stuff going on. And in our prokaryotic cell, we don't have any of that. There's no nucleus. We just have this dark area and this light area. So they're pretty easy to spot the difference if you look for that nucleus and you look for those organelles. So what's the deal with that? What's a prokaryotic cell? Well, the word prokaryote, we want to know what this word means, comes from two parts, a prefix and then the actual word. It's Greek in origin. The term pro means coming before, and karyote means kernel or like a nut, like in the middle of a seed or in the middle of a fruit. So a prokaryote is before the kernel. So these are the cells that don't have a nucleus. They don't have organelles, and they are the oldest forms of life on our planet. Okay, there are, fossil record prokaryotes that are like 3.5 billion years old, which is pretty impressive because the planet itself is only like 4.5 billion years old. So these guys have been around and been successful for a very long time. Thing is, they're just not very complex when you compare them to eukaryotes. Eukaryotes, EU, in Greek, that prefix means true, and karyote again means kernel. So this is the true nucleus or the true kernel, right? And these cells all have a nucleus. Some of them have more than one nucleus, right? So like Giardia is actually binucleated. There is a nucleus right here, and there's another one actually right there. This is Giardia. Giardia looks really cool, really nice. He is not. He will give you really, 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 really bad diarrhea. He's a parasite. But he's got organelles. You can see all these little dots in here. These are all organelles. And that gives him compartments for his chemical reactions to take place, for all of the different things that the cell needs to do. Eukaryotes are much bigger than prokaryotes. When we look at eukaryotes, we can break them down even further. So we want to look at their structure. If something is a plant cell, it's going to have a cell wall. Cell walls are made of cellulose. Now, remember from earlier in the year, you see the ending ose, that's a carbohydrate, it's a sugar. And that's what gives the plant its structure. It helps it hold it up. Animals don't have a cell wall. We have a cell membrane. Okay, and the cell membrane kind of acts like a like a gatekeeper. It lets things in and out. It's really flexible. It lets the cell move. So if we look at this, we can say, okay, well, there is no cell wall here. So this is a much more animal-like cell. This is not actually an animal. It's considered something else. But we would definitely be able to look at it and say, oh, it's not a plant. All right. When you look at the two and compare them, it becomes pretty obvious what you're looking at. So this is definitely a cell wall. They don't have to be squares. Like in this case, they all kind of have a multi-sided shape. Those are all my cell walls in this plant. Okay, and they form tight junctions with each other. So things can still communicate, move through. The cells can still exchange material, but they're locked in place with that cell wall. Over here, we have an amoeba. And an amoeba is a single-celled organism, and he's got all of these organelles and membrane-bound spaces inside, and he can move all over the place. So you've got what we call pseudopods. Pseudo means false, and pod comes from the same word like podiatrist, which is a foot doctor. So a pseudopod is a false foot. And we call them false feet because it can send them out, move itself forward, and then retract the feet, send them out somewhere else. And they're really, really useful. They use them to hunt. They use them to find food. And they use them to grab stuff. So, yeah, right, useful things. Cells have what's called a cytoskeleton. It's a framework inside the cytoplasm that is constantly being rebuilt and moved to facilitate movement within the cell. They're formed from proteins, okay, and there's three main fibers that we want to know make up the cytoskeleton. They're actin fibers. Think like action is going to occur. They can contract, they can expand, they change the shape of the cell. It's what allows that. It's one of the things that allows that amoeba to have those pseudopods. There are microtubules, which are hollow in the middle, and they allow things to move across the outside of the microtubule in order to move things around the cell. Because remember, it's a cell, it's alive, it's got to move stuff from point A to point B, just like when I eat food, it's got to go down into my stomach moves it into my intestines, the cells in my intestines distribute it to the body, right? The cell has to be able to move things around inside the cell just the same. The last thing is the intermediate filament. It's going to help keep your ribosomes in one spot. It's going to keep your enzymes in one spot so that one area has a bunch of chemical reactions going on, or if one area has a bunch of proteins being created or put together, they can be all done in the same spot. So that's the cytoskeleton. The cytoplasm is mostly water, right? It's a jelly, okay? It has some fluidity to it. It can move. Unless we stain it, because it's mostly water, it shows up as clear in the microscope. But some things like methyl blue can stain the cytoplasm to make it easier to see. Now, this is a pretty cool video that's going to show you those pseudopods in motion. So what we have here is this big guy. It looks like a C right now. That's the amoeba. This little cell inside is a paramecia, and this is a stentor. So we're going to watch this, and I'm going to kind of point out. Oh, no, we're not. It says it's unavailable. I'll try to find another one and link to it. Okay. So let's get rid of that. All right. So that's the introduction to the cell theory, to cells as a whole. More of that coming later on. And I will try to link one of those videos so that you can watch that amoeba in action. All right.